We got the cure, we got the answer to what's happening in society. We got the power to solutions and provide the healing that you need. We got the cure, we got the answer with discussions that will set you free. This is the Arc Republic, and you're listening to The Remedy. The Remedy. The Remedy.
Since the emancipation of millions of enslaved Black people who were forced to endure hundreds of years of chattel slavery or free forced labor under extreme duress that built the capitalistic society as we know the United States, there has been a demand or call for reparations since the end of the Civil War. What are reparations? Reparations is an act of some form of great restorative justice. And in the case of the United States, it actually has happened. There have been groups of people who have received reparations in the form of payment, allotment of resources, and even legislative protections to protect those payments and allotment of resources so they can enfranchise themselves. Ironically, those who were enslaved never received anything. Now, herein enters hashtag ADOS or hashtag American Descendants of Slaves. Hashtag ADOS says not only were those who were enslaved were not compensated or given some form of reparations, but their descendants endured another 100 plus years of damaging, discriminatory treatment in the form of things like Jim Crow laws, mass incarceration, redlining, and other forms of systemic anti-Black racism that is baked into the United States almost like apple pie. As a result of that, today they call for reparations for those who came from those generations of disenfranchisement. Now, with the ascension of ADOS, there has been a lot of controversy. So Arc Republic sent out a call, and 3 members of ADOS agreed to talk about their solutions on the Remedy podcast. Now, our discussion went on for hours, so we have 2 parts. Here is part 1 of ADOS, the movement, reparations, and demands during a major election year. Let's chop it up.
Man, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kaia Shivers, and I'm with Arc Republic, and we are on a very new podcast called The Remedy, where we focus more on the solutions to address the issues. So I have been trying to get a hold of y'all for a minute. So I am so happy you heard the call, the hoo-hoo, and y'all were like, and y'all responded back. But we have members of the ADOS movement, American Descendants of Slaves. I am going to allow our attendees to explain all about ADOS, and we get into some fundamental solutions that they see will be beneficial to Black folk in this country. So let me introduce them. First, we have Mark Stevenson. Mark Stevenson is a U.S. Navy veteran, entrepreneur, and political activist in Columbus, Ohio. He has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, and local newspapers throughout the state of Ohio for his work fighting for police reform, reparations, housing, and education reform. Next up, we have Chad Brown, is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, AKA the SIP. My father's from Vicksburg, now residing in Los Angeles. He is a graduate of Tougaloo College, okay, and began his professional career with the Atlanta-based municipal bond underwriting firm, Jackson Securities, founded by former 3-term mayor of Atlanta, Maynard H. Jackson. After 12 years in muni bond finance, Chad changed career paths and entered into digital marketing, advertising, and sales, where he continues to work today. Chad is a reparations advocate. Sits on the advisory board of ADOS Los Angeles, and is an active member of the SFV chapter of the NAACP. Last but not least, San Fernando Valley. Yes. For those of you, yes, San Fernando Valley. Last but not least, Reggie is a real estate broker in Boston, Massachusetts, with nearly a decade of experience in the industry. He also volunteers with Keeping Codman Affordable, a group of community organizers dedicated to fighting gentrification and displacement and promoting tenants' rights. The group seeks to engage and empower the local community through voter registration, education, lobbying, and demonstration. Reggie is best known for his commentary on Breaking Ground and Tone Talks YouTube broadcast, on which he is a frequent caller. Oh, yes, I know you, Reggie. I've heard you. Okay, how you doing? All right. Welcome. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity at Arc Republic to talk to you. So let's get into these issues. First, I would like for all of you to first talk about what currently is pressing issues that you see that ADOS need to tackle, or that is in the forefront of the ADOS movement.
I guess I'll take it first. Well, thank you for having me on the show today. I think the most pressing issue is that there has to be a fundamental shift in the way that the descendants of slaves look at how we engage with politicians and how we play politics. We have seen in our communities the same failed policies that have gentrified our neighborhoods. They have created a huge balloon in the wealth gap. And we have the same politicians that come every 2 years asking us to vote, not for what they're wanting to do for us, but because they're either look like us or because they have the D behind their name. So I think for us as American descendants of slavery, we have to have a fundamental shift in our political ideology and the way that we look at politicians in regards to policies that affect our communities.
Okay, Chad,
I absolutely agree with everything Mark said. There needs to be a fundamental shift in how we engage in politics as American descendants of slavery. And at the core of our politics is reparations, to redress the 250 years plus of slavery and another 150 years of Jim Crow institutional white supremacy. And so what we are pushing for at our core is reparations. And I should also add that we want to make sure that it is actually collective uplift and reparations, that when it is passed, we are talking about all 32 to 35 million ADOS that are getting lifted up collectively, and not just some small group profiting off of cronyism and corruption. So I think if you ask me what our top issue is, I'm going to always say reparations. That's the heartbeat of the Black agenda that we're pushing.
Okay, Reggie.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of what both of them said, that reparations is the heartbeat, and that there has to be a fundamental shift, and that not just politicians, but America in general has to undergo a reorientation on how to treat us, whether we're talking about political boundaries, cultural boundaries, social boundaries. There's been a lack of that, due to, pushes for multiculturalism, and that we're all in this together, that the specificity of our history and of our political condition has been lost in in all lives mattering of political debates that come from both the right and the left. So that's kind of where that hard line that ADOS draws comes from.
So ADOS has been, the term is a hotbed term, right? It's a hashtag that gets a lot of conversation and engagement around it, for good, bad, and ugly, right? I want you to, we're going to get back to these issues, but I want you to explain and tell folk who are our listeners exactly what is ADOS and what is the movement about. I would like to hear it from you so you can explain it, because a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of things, right? A lot of people have said things, but what is it and what does it mean to you?
I guess I'll start on that one. So ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And so it's not a new concept. This is something that King wrote about in his final book about being the American descendants of slavery. And it's a lineage distinction. So what we are saying is, as you heard Reggie say, we can no longer move forward on a basis of just melanin content or kind of abstract concepts of being African-American or quote unquote Black, which has no specificity to it. So ADOS seeks to bring specificity to the lineage of those people who descended out of the institution of chattel slavery here in America. And that specificity is required because that group that unique group is owed a unique justice claim by this government. And so at its core, ADOS is lineage. Either you are or you aren't. There is no, like, you don't have to take a test, or there's no DNA, marker for it. There's no registration for it. You're not joining an organization. It's a lineage that you're born into, just as if you were Jamaican or Haitian, or if you come from Ghana and you're Ghanaian, etc. So at its core, lineage.
Would anybody like to add to that?
I think he explained it the way we always explain it, and I think a lot of people they confuse what we're saying. They want to come up with all these other type of colloquialisms, but at the core, our people were enslaved here by the United States government. Slavery was legal for a period of time. From that, you birthed out Reconstruction, and now then you go into Jim Crow, a segregated South. Throughout all of that, our people were systematically stripped of wealth. They were terrorized, they were brutalized, they were lynched. So for us, it is getting back to being, showcasing and highlighting the ills of the lineage that we bear the burden of right now, and the cost of that. It's not so much to say that you can just one day just create a policy that is going to erase all the systemic and institutionalized racism that our ancestors had to deal with, and that translated down generationally to us. And that is kind of at the foundation of the reason why we have this big racial wealth gap in the first place. So I think when people talk about ADOS, they need to understand that we're looking at it from a standpoint, bringing down the timeline from when our people first were enslaved here in this country to where we at in America, and our standing in America right now.
Why does lineage become an important or become center in terms of identifying ADOS as opposed to all Black people that are here? Could you explain more of that, please?
Well, lineage matters for the same reason that it matters for anyone else in the diaspora. Those who descend from what is now Jamaica have a specific history. They have specific heroes and icons and culture, i.e. Marcus Garvey. You look at Trinidad, you'll have Kwame Ture. You'll have if you look at Haiti, you have Toussaint Louverture. Specific history, specific stories that should be acknowledged. Specific colonial experiences that should be acknowledged. Like, lineage is everything, not just for the diaspora, but just for people around the world. It doesn't benefit anyone of any type of race or lineage to flatten themselves under some of these census categories within the United States. You could even take the Asians, for example. The Chinese immigrant that comes over, 50% of them have degrees, whereas someone like the Hmong or the Vietnamese, come from poorer parts of Asia and have a specific experience and have a specific colonial experience, vis-a-vis China or even the United States. So when you flatten people under categories like just Asians or even just Latinos, which is widely diverse, it's a disservice to everyone. Like, lineage matters, for everyone. I think people just have a problem because, to varying degrees, every other group, whether Black, brown, Asian, white, every single group to varying degrees benefits from the oppression and the accrued disadvantage of the descendants of slaves. So if you upset that hierarchy, it makes everyone uncomfortable. And that's why you see the pushback that's happening now.
Okay, yeah, so I was definitely going to get into that. Before that question is answered, so when ADOS is about almost 3 years old in terms of the movement. How?
Well, but in terms of when the hashtag kind of took off, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I think that was around maybe January, February of 2019, around the time that Kamala Harris announced.
Okay.
And even if you look at months prior, there was a large push. I don't remember if we were using the hashtag, but what happened was we were discussing the Black Belt and how we observed how the United Nations came to the Black Belt in Alabama and said, I've never seen anything like this in a developed country. This is literally a third world existence in the richest country in the world. What's going on here? So we go back and we see who is the representative for that district in the Black Belt, which was Representative Terry Sewell. So there was a call to action to hold her accountable. And there was a flurry of tweets, calls, emails, and Sewell came out and called on then Speaker Ryan to do something legislatively to repair the damage in the Black Belt. So I think that was kind of the first time we kind of saw what happens when we put our voices together and make a collective push. And that's why it was just like the snap of a finger when Kamala Harris came, and there were criticisms that we had of her as a senator. We kind of predicted, like, this is going to be Obama 2.0. Mm-hmm. We're not falling for this again. So when she comes back around, that's kind of when you see the hashtag take off. But the conversation's been happening for a long time in terms of our distinctive lineage. You can even go back pre-Carnell and more and look at Dr. Cornel West and Tavis Smiley critiquing the Obama administration. We're like, how is it that we have a so-called Black president, yet we don't have a Black agenda, and yet we cannot take him to task not only for his ignoring of Black people's issues here, but for advancing imperialism around the world vis-a-vis bombing Africa unilaterally without the consent of Congress, because only Congress can declare war. But Obama has been bombing countries in a way that we haven't seen before or since. So this specific conversation of Black politics and Black agenda, it's been building up to this point for a very long time.
Right, I want to say in 2018, definitely, because Arc Republic started in 2017. In 2018, I remember tuning into Yvette Carnell and Tone talking about this, right? And saying the term American Descendants of Slaves, but the hashtag starts in 2019. But you're very correct. This attempt in sanitizing what really the Obama administration was about and what it really did not do for Black people has been a bone of contention in terms of, let's talk about this political process. I want to know what do you think were or have been the key issues or things that ADOS addresses that has become extremely attractive, where people are beginning to support, and it's gaining a lot of traction to the point that it is very much, in my opinion, central in pushing HR 40 being a discussion last year. What are these things that people are telling you? This is why, I'm rocking with ADOS, and this is a movement that I stand behind.
Well, I think personally, it's because we have a clear agenda. And for the first time, you see a grassroots movement that was birthed, by people that from the ground. None of us come from none of us come from the hill, besides, Yvette Carnell. For the most part, we are just regular, ordinary citizens in our communities that have taken upon ourselves to do what the Obama administration, his call to action was, get out and advocate in your communities and fight. So we've taken that mantle on to fight for the people who are the voiceless. And we're also educating as we're going along. We're giving people political educations. We're telling people, hey, read this book, read The Color of Law, read The Color of Wealth, because we have to put it in the context so our people could understand that these policies, these draconian measures that keep coming down from Congress, ultimately affect the bottom line in our communities. And if you can look out your door, one year it's all Black, And then next thing you know, you look around and everything's all beautified and all your neighbors are all white, then and your property value is going up, and you're like, okay, I've been living here for 30 years and it's just been ravished with poverty and trash and everything else. And all of a sudden, an infuse of capital comes in, but it's not capital for us, it's for a whole different entire demographic. Then you have to ask yourself, what are we actually voting for? So I think that is the key thing about our movement, is that as people come along and we reaching out to the masses, they're getting woken up, you know. So we always talk about the woke culture, but Black people are waking up. The descendants of slaves are waking up to who actually has created the issues in our communities in the first place.
And I also think that one of the things that happened is that we got access to data that we previously hadn't seen before. And so, you know, men lie, women lie, numbers don't, right? And so when we look at, you know, things like the color of wealth in Los Angeles, and we see the racial wealth gap on that microcosm in Los Angeles, where the middle Black family without depreciating assets is worth $200 compared to the middle white family at $110,000, I think it was. We see that racial wealth gap manifested. So I think a lot of ADOS are living this, but it wasn't until I can speak for myself. It wasn't until I actually saw the data that I was able to understand the condition that I was living in. And as you heard Mark said, that it wasn't because of any deficiency or anything I was doing. It was actually through targeted, weaponized policy that was structured to keep us as a bottom caste here in the country that we built. So I think the introduction of data changed the conversation for us. We no longer were moving on emotion, and that we know it's bad. We know the police are killing us. We know that we're living in poverty. But once we see the numbers behind that, and we see that racial wealth gulf, that then gives us, you know, a very concrete data point to point to and say, we got to fix this. Reparations is the solution to this.
Reggie, do you want to add?
Yeah, just piggybacking off of them. One of the biggest things was the data and the political education. I think, you know, James Baldwin said it best. You know, to be a Negro and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage all the time. So imagine what happens when someone like Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, you go from relatively conscious to very conscious because you understand the data. I don't see how a descendant of slaves who lives in the city of Boston, as I do, who understands that you have $8 in wealth compared to white families who have nearly $250,000. If that does not inspire some type of rage, I don't know what does. If you understand that the wealth gap nationwide is not 13-to-1, as they say in HR 40, but when you take out depreciating assets, the middle Black family is $1,700 before COVID. That's a 100-to-1 ratio. If that does not inspire rage, I don't know what does. If you understand that our very bodies were used as capital, which results in over $100 trillion in household wealth for white families, whereas you have maybe 2.5 in your group, and that is aggregated at the top. And the bottom half of America, minus billions of dollars, Black people under 40, absolutely zero wealth. If you understand those numbers, you'll understand the subsequent rage from someone who has understood that data and knows what that means.
So this is the question is what I'm going to ask you. It's a personal one, but it's also one based in locality. First, I want to know why you joined ADOS. What was it? And also what you propelled you to be as involved as you are. But all of you are in cities where Black folk are not struggling, but struggling. You know, I'm from Los Angeles. I still vote in Congresswoman Maxine Waters' district. I see exactly what has happened and what is going on. So I would like for you to personally talk about this journey that you had in when you're hearing about ADOS and then you attaching yourself and then being involved in the movement. But please give me a very kind of full, robust layout of what your cities look like with Black people. And I'm really interested because part of the conversation when we talked about lineage is creating a very clear delineation between somebody who was native born and has been here for generations versus those who have recently immigrated within the last 20 to 30 years, and what even their conditions are. Because I know, like in Boston, there's a Cape Verdean community that exists. In Los Angeles, you know, there's a Nigerian and an Ethiopian community. In Columbus, I don't know what, I think there's like an East African community in Columbus, if I'm for sure, and it's a college town. So first, tell me your personal journey. Second, tell me what the ADOS community looks like in your respective communities, and even as it is compared with, you know, Black international or Black immigrants that are coming to the space.
Okay, what you want to start, Reggie?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say for me, my journey as ADOS started before ADOS. I guess I could say I think the reason that we are able to gel so well is because we have that lived experience. You know, I used to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma before coming to Boston, and my mother never let me forget, you know, what happened with the Black Wall Street. I'm always reminded, you know, before my great grandmother passed, you know, her red hair because her grandfather was an Irish slave master. Both of her parents were enslaved. You know, if you go to my father's side, you also find, you know, Irish slave masters. So the story of being descendants of slaves and then the subsequent plunder and oppression that's used to tie in those gains from slavery is part of that collective story. So when I and others run into an Yvette Carnell or an Antonio Moore who's able to break down and explain the data, when I look at Yvette Carnell, I don't see Yvette Carnell, I see myself. When I look at Antonio Moore, I see myself. When I look at Chad or Mark, I see myself. I had a great long conversation with an ADOS couple in Washington, you know, that I bumped into online and never spoken to them before, but talking to them, I saw myself. So when the ADOS movement, you know, comes to be, you know, we kind of see ourselves reflected in each other, and we see that story. And I feel like that's kind of what's kind of pushed us forward, and it's kind of been able to help us kind of fend off the attacks that we've been experiencing. In Boston locally, as I referred to earlier, the Federal Reserve data shows that the median wealth position for Black families in Boston is only $8. Nearly, I think, $247,000 for white families. For Caribbean families, $10,000, and I think it kind of speaks to, you know, because as we know, before 1965, the percentage of Black immigrants was to the right of the decimal point. There was pretty much no one here. But as you go from
due to the Hart-Sellers Act of 1965, which actually was implemented as a result of, in response to, the Civil Rights Act, you know, that had been passed, right? So yeah.
So as you move forward post 65 and more post 80 and 90, the question becomes is how do people come to this country? And even though 10,000 compared to 250,000 is still a huge wealth disparity, how is it that within 20, 30 years of many of you coming here, how are you able to amass 10,000 in wealth? And I still have 8 after 400 years. That is a huge disparity. And it's also a very complicated and nuanced conversation because, you know, as many of our detractors point out, you know, they do experience, you know, discrimination at the hands of police, you know, because if I'm sitting in the car with a Jamaican and a Haitian and we're pulled over, everybody's in danger. But what has to happen is that we have to be allowed to tell those specific stories and have targeted specific policies. And it's kind of a tightrope to walk, in a city like Boston, because you have people coming trying to make a life for themselves. But what you also have is you have a government who comes to me with a solution talking about women and minorities, to where there's a flattening and that there's no specificity. So to where I can pick out all of these other populations and grab a token here, grab a token here, and totally erase the descendants of slaves, but still look like I'm progressive because these tokens that I picked or these initiatives that I'm pushing forward benefit people that are not white. So that's part of the challenge that many of the descendants of slaves, in Boston are experiencing, trying to forge out that specific identity and specific policies to rectify what's been happening for centuries.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, part of the conversation is that how do you deal with these gross disparities? How do you deal with these racist structures that are implemented? But at the same time, how do you effectively challenge and work through very clear policies, whether they're unspoken or in place or not, that, and this is in my opinion, that when Black folk immigrate, it's like you're Black, but you're not that Black person, right? And this is something that even Malcolm X talked about. I remember this. He had this, a story about how it was a brother, an ADOS brother, right? And how he was refused entry into this restaurant. And one day he just decided to wrap his head and go in and say he was African, and they allowed him to eat, right? And so like these differences. So on one hand, you do have, people who immigrate who acknowledge it, but in full, right? The issue is that there's they become the benefactors of these. And if you're immigrating for a better life, better opportunity, your investment in dismantling the racist structures may not be in full if in some way, shape, or form you're benefiting or you're not at the lowest rung of society. So these are those complex issues that they're talking about, right? And it's what I study. So I'm glad, you mentioned that and said that working through it, because I think part of the criticisms with ADOS is that it operates as this organization that is, I can't even, I'm trying to find another way to say it, but it's like as if taking the white racist structure and like flipping it on its head and being the Black version of that. I don't think that Black people could be that, in this society. But in these criticisms is that how do you talk about this, but how do we talk through all of our, inter issues?
I think, like for me, being here in Columbus and being the fact that I'm not a Columbus native, I'm actually originally from Georgia. I grew up in predominantly, ADOS community. I went to predominantly ADOS schools. I had all predominantly ADOS teachers growing up from. So my whole matriculation was around just ADOS folks. I never saw Hispanics, and I never saw, Black immigrants, because where I was at in Augusta, Georgia, there were none. There were none. We didn't have a big immigrant population growing up. So I didn't get really, I guess, culturalized until I went off to Fort Valley State, which is a HBCU. Shout out to my Wildcats. And then I started meeting, Africans. And then once I joined the U.S. Navy and got to go all over the world and see conditions, what I found was when I was in Djibouti, Africa, we would have African immigrants immigrating into the United States, but they were getting culturally conditioned before they came. And it was, okay, once you get to the United States, stay away from the American Blacks. Okay, stay away from them, because all they do is complain about things. They don't want to work hard, and they're lazy. That was the consensus. So as I went, as my journey through, being around, getting stationed in different places, I ended up in Trenton, New Jersey, And I saw full-fledged how the diaspora was separated. And it was separated because you had communities where it was just strictly ADOS folks, and then you had communities of just Nigerians, and I was like, okay, but they never intermix. But we have always been the people who have been accepting of everybody in the diaspora. When we say support Black businesses, we don't say support ADOS businesses only. We support whoever it looks like us, and we have always been welcoming. The issue comes is when that love is not rescinded, is when it's not given back. Anytime somebody Black is killed, we don't care where they came from, how they got here. We are out here fighting tooth and nail, fighting for justice. All we ask for is that love to be reciprocated when we're talking about these issues when it comes to race. When I came to Columbus, Ohio, what I saw was a huge population. And people don't know, Columbus has the second largest Somali population besides Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have the second largest in the country. All the Somalians live in one particular area in the city, the north side. So they never come to the east side, which is predominantly ADOS. They never intermix. They never come over, but they have politicians and they have their own structure of the way they see things. So now they're running for offices and they're talking about fighting for issues, but their issues are central to what they're experiencing on the north side. We have a problem with that, because there are issues on the east side, and the wealth gap is so exploded. The medium income for a Black family here in Columbus is $150. We're in between Boston and Los Angeles, and so we have 6 of the wealthiest counties in the country besides the ones out in California, and that is New Albany, Upper Arlington, Westerville, Worthington, Dublin, Hilliard. And you going, if anybody comes here, you will see we are the mecca of all logistics. Every single company that does anything like Victoria's Secret, Express, we are the retail capital of the United States. So all these corporations are based here. Black people are not in management in any of these companies. Some of them are just starting to have, positions like chief of diversity and inclusion because of all the things that are going on in this country. But if you ask the average Black person, none of the logistics centers are anywhere near where Black people live at. Most people don't have cars or anything to get to these jobs, so there's no public transportation for them. So, and the only thing you can look at is who has been in office. Well, Columbus is completely blue. We have no Republicans in the city council. We haven't had a Republican mayor in over 30 years. So you have to ask yourself, okay, who are the people that are causing these issues? And you can't blame Trump for things that inherently were here and systematically were here beforehand. I got involved in the movement because I saw things, and I was always the type that if I saw something, I'm gonna say something. So I kind of bounced around, seeing I could decipher that the conditions were bad. I didn't just have the data. I just didn't have the data. And one day, a friend of mine said, "You need to listen to Yvette Carnell." And I was like, "Who is that?" He was like, "You need to listen to her." I said, "Okay." So I popped on one of her shows. She was with Iron Me at the time. I popped on the show and I was like, this is it. This is what I need right here. So as she's giving out education, I'm sitting here like a student, like I'm in political science 101. I'm taking down stuff, I'm writing it down, and I'm researching, and I'm starting to study, and I'm like, everything comes to play. So as she's matriculating in her process with her YouTube channel, I'm basically getting a bachelor's degree in Black and African American studies, basically. So I took upon the mantle once I got here to say, you know what, I think I'm gonna fight because I made Columbus my home. I'm gonna fight for the ADOS folks here in Columbus because they have systematically been locked out. Our institutions like the NAACP and the Urban League have failed them completely. We getting offered up, that continues to keep us in a welfare state and denying, the economic empowerment that a community needs. So when we start challenging these politicians on these issues, they get radio silent. Or, you get the traditional, well, why are you attacking a Black person? We need to be supporting them. It's already hard for us. It's hard for me too. So you don't get a pass because you're a politician, because if I didn't do my job, if I didn't do my job for the U.S. Navy, I would have got in a bunch of trouble. If I'm out here and I'm an entrepreneur, if I don't go out here and find business for my business, I'm not going to be successful. So if you're not doing your job as a politician, why should I continue to support you? So I think from that, because we can talk about these issues and we can go to them and say these are the problems. They don't want to hear that. They want to, we started off as Russian bots. I'm not Russian. Chad not Russian, Reggie not Russian. You can clearly see us right now. There's no, you don't see no pictures of Putin or whoever, Gorbachev in my background. No, we are Black Americans who are saying we are fed up with the status quo. We're fed up with it, and it's system. In order for the systems to actually be torn down, it has to be chaos. And we're that fire that I always tell people, Yvette was the spark, but when she sparked, it was some gasoline with the knowledge, and then it erupted into the birthing of all these activists across the country. And I love it because we have never had a movement that has fought for economic empowerment the way that we are doing with the ADOS movement.
Thank you, Mark. So going to Chad, there is a moment that I think everybody has when they come into a knowing, when it all kind of comes together, which is what I'm hearing when Mark talks, when Reggie talks. Talk about that moment and why you joined ADOS and what's it looking like in LA.
Yeah, so much like these brothers, my personal journey, I've been Black my whole life, right? I was raised by a Black grandmother born in the early 1900s who used to tell me stories about Jim Crow and show me the signs of, white and Black only that were over the water fountains, right? She used to tell me a story about my uncle, taking a sip out of the white water fountain and saying the white water tastes just like the Black water, right? And how she admonished him for that because that could mean your life at that time, right? And so growing up in that type of environment and hearing it viscerally from my grandmother, and then seeing my mother, who, despite having, she was aberrational. She had a high level of education, having to work, 3, sometimes 4 jobs just to make ends meet, and you look across the fence and you don't see that type of life happening in the other societies, right? You only see that happening in ADOS society. So I kind of grew up understanding that we were different, right? And our situations and our experiences were different. And we all hear like you gotta work harder if you're Black or ADOS in America just to get ahead, right? And so I always had issue with that and kind of wondering why did I have to be the exceptional Negro just to like live a decent American lifestyle sort of thing. And so for me, like Mark, I've lived in a lot of different cities. I'm not originally from Los Angeles. I've been here about 10 years, moved here from Atlanta. I went to high school in Houston, Texas, and then moved after high school between New York and then came back to Atlanta and then came over to California. So the kind of common theme for me in all the cities that I've been in, because I've surrounded myself around ADOS people at every opportunity, is that we're at the bottom everywhere. Like it's different in different localities. Like in the rural South, in the Black Belt, it's a different sort of poverty than it is in Los Angeles, right? But when you go to the rural South and you view that poverty, as you heard Reggie say, that's ADOS people. When you go to Skid Row in Los Angeles, that's ADOS people, right? So the racial wealth gap, while I didn't have the language for it, I saw it all around me, right? It's like it was manifesting itself everywhere. And so then for me, in college, I became a big Pan-Africanist, right? Because searching for identity, searching for solutions, I gravitated towards Pan-Africanism and started reading things like John Henrik Clarke and Dr. Ben and trying to gain a sense of self, right? And never really felt like it was connecting fully and never really felt like it was affecting my life. Like, we could like wear dashikis and we could talk about ancient African greatness, but I live in America, right? And I'm witnessing American life that's rooted in slavery and Jim Crow, and trying to look across the Atlantic for solutions just kind of got to the point where I was like, this doesn't make sense. And around that time, I think it was around end of 2018 or so, I found Yvette's channel. And like Mark, I just was like, this is it. This is truth. Like this is the language that I needed to be able to talk to my experience, to talk to my mother's experience, to talk to my grandmother's experience, and on back along the line. And then coming across Tone, you know, pretty quickly after that, I've been involved in data fields my entire life. And I know that, you know, organizations, multi-billion-dollar, multinational organizations optimize to data. And so I think that was the missing piece for me, was once I saw the data, it was like my mind was blown, right? Because it's like giving me language to talk about what I already know to be the case. I already know this to be the reality, but now I can put a number to it, and I can put a metric to it, and I can start working on optimizing to those metrics, right? And I think that was the kind of aha moment for me, was really seeing the data and then continuing my education through, you know, Yvette's book clubs, reading some of the texts that you heard Mark reference, et cetera. So that was kind of my personal journey. And for me, I'm a father, seeing the data and seeing the trend of ADOS in America, if we don't do anything, that's unacceptable to me, being a father, having daughters. I have to work to make this country better for them, better than it was for me, better than it was for my mother, and better than it was for my grandmother. Because again, I saw a mother who did everything right. I mean, she got the education, she got the degrees. And at one point she's working at a chicken processing plant as a security guard, right? At an hourly security guard, trying to make ends meet. So I understood immediately that, you know, when I read Darity's report and the things we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap, and one of those bullet points is education doesn't close the racial wealth gap. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, absolutely. Like, it doesn't close the racial wealth gap, because I've been around some very highly educated ADOS people who have died broke. You know, they have not passed along any inheritance. They have not passed along any wealth to their children, and their children are starting over again in a system that's tilted against them. So I kind of like, all things came together for me in my journey once I found Yvette, once I found Antonio, and I was able to see the data and then continue to study along that pathway. And so out here in Los Angeles, I mean, you referenced it, we're about 8% of the population, which is declining. And what I see out here is, you know, I say, you know, I always prefer my racism in a white hood versus a business suit, because that's what you get in Mississippi. You get white hood racism, right? Like on one side of the tracks, that's the white folks, the other side of the track, black folks, you know, you don't go over there at certain times of the night, etc. Out here, racism comes with a business suit and a smile and a handshake. And then when you turn your back, it stabs you in the back, and it does it through policy, right? It does it through policy that you're not paying attention to. It does it through the flattening of blackness and the erasure of our history, our unique lineage, to meld and fold other people into policy where we get left out, where we get left behind, right? I saw that throughout my professional career, when we went from minority-owned businesses to minority and women-owned businesses to disadvantaged businesses, et cetera, always widening that focus so other folks could be added into any benefits that were supposed to go to ADOS. And so out here in California, that's very much what I see, is policy has been weaponized against us for a very long time. You know, people like to talk about California being admitted as a free state into the union, but don't fully know the history of California and how it was complicit in slavery and things like the fugitive slave law, and undergirded that national institution, you know, maybe not with plantations, but through policy. And so we see 8% of the population of ADOS out here in California, but we're, you know, I think the number is close to 40% of the incarcerated population, 40% of the homeless, 50% of homeless families. We are overrepresented disproportionately in all socioeconomic indicators, and we are at the bottom. And it's getting worse out here because there is a very active agenda of gentrification and displacement occurring to make sure that they are recapturing whatever ownership that we have out here now, which is small, you know, infinitesimal at this point, but and declining rapidly. So what I see out here is the same thing that I'm sure Reggie sees in Boston, that Mark sees in Columbus, is that policy has been weaponized against us. And unless we stand up and start demanding that our lawmakers and our politicians specifically address our communities and come with specific allocations, benefits, set-asides, policy measures that are going to impact our communities in a positive way, then it'll come a time when you won't see any ADOS in California. It'll come a time when you won't see us in Los Angeles or San Francisco, just because we've been pushed out, we've been gentrified out, and we've been tossed to the wind. So that's what I see happening out here, and that's why I got involved out here, because at the end of the day, we have to get involved where we are, right? And I'm in Los Angeles, and linked up with folks out here who are part of the ADOS movement, who are like-minded like me, and we're trying to push forward, policy and push our politicians out here and hold them accountable to make sure that they're talking to us specifically, that they're not just ignoring us and pursuing a POC agenda or an immigration agenda, something that ultimately harms our communities.
So with the ADOS movement, there has been a number of critiques against it, and I want to address some of the major ones that I've seen in there. The first of which is that ADOS is not only anti-immigrant, but specifically anti-Black immigrant.
Well, I think I'd like to tackle that one. I think.
Why you laughing, Mark? What's so funny? Hold up.
I hear that all the time.
I hear that. No, I'm serious.
Yeah. I hear that all the time, and every time I hear that, I laugh.
And they say, like, this is a form of nativism, like it's a Black form of nativism.
Okay, well, first, I want to kind of put these criticisms in context. When the hashtag first took off at the beginning of 2019, subsequent to that, we had Democratic Party insiders who were sympathetic to ADOS come to us and tell us what was coming, which is what's coming now, to say there's going to be a concerted effort to take you guys out because you're disrupting the status quo. They want to get you out of here. Like we just want to get Trump out of here, and ADOS is already upsetting the apple cart. We picked Kamala Harris. We got the Clinton machine, who's that, and I believe that's part of why Kamala's here, is the extension of that Clinton machine. But these insiders let us know that, the media is coming with this, the party is coming with this. So that's part of it. Second point, the whole nativism and anti-immigrant argument does not fly with me if you look at the history of ADOS people in this country. Because number one, the first act of deportation and removal can be tied to Lincoln. After we were so-called emancipated, one of the first things that Lincoln and others wanted to do in this country was to deport the descendants of slaves. So the whole bringing in and removing of populations, that was first weaponized against us. Number two, a lot of what the United States has done is bring in populations to help oppress us or to displace us. You can go all the way back to slavery. They bring in European immigrants, from Ireland, from other places, to say, I need more white people. I need more slave masters. So, we go back to how the Irish became white. These people, were immigrants. We look at how, and Chad could probably speak to this, to where we have Mexican gangs in California who behaved in a lot of the ways that the Irish behaved, specific targeted terrorist violence to drive Black people out of neighborhoods so that they can come in, acquire the property, and grow wealth for themselves in the same way that the Irish did. So when we talk about immigration, what we're talking about is not an anti-immigration. We're talking about being anti the expansion of whiteness, because when the immigrants come here, they assume whiteness or they assume a place in the hierarchy above us, in the caste system. So that is what we're pushing back against. We also push back against the whole model minority thing, because what happens, whether it's Irish people, because Jason Riley and I believe in the New York Times said, well, here was the Irish path. Black people need to do better. What we have now is, people like Tucker Carlson going on Fox News saying, no reparations for you. Look at the Nigerians; they make $100,000 a year. So when we push back against it, it's not nativism or xenophobia. It is a recognition of the centuries long history of the United States using other populations to further our oppression. And you can even see this happening outside of the United States in the Caribbean. I was fascinated to learn that part of CARICOM's reparations claim is a reckoning of their colonial masters bringing in Indian labor to depress wages for their former slaves and to undermine them in the labor market. So this is a part of this debate is what the colonizers, our shared colonizers, are doing to us. So when people throw out this claim of nativism and anti-immigration, it's a misreading of history, and it's a misunderstanding of policy, and it's a misunderstanding of our position of this country historically and today.
I would say it's also a misrepresentation of who we are as a people. Like I said earlier, we've always been welcoming to the diaspora. We have supported, because traditionally, I would say that most ADOS people, kind of like Chad, most of us come from a Pan-Africanist background. We all kind of felt that, we had an attachment to the motherland. And that was supposed to be reciprocated back and forth. We've always seen the movies. We know about the history of African countries. We look at the Mindi people, and we look at all these warriors, the Oguns, so we have this culturalism of what we thought the diaspora was about. The issue comes into is what I think is that the whitewashing of historical context when it comes to the descendants of slaves. And I think if you look at how even in the textbooks now, that the way that kids are taught about slavery, as if it was a choice, as if our people were not chattel, beaten, and things, and they are taking advantage of this by teaching this altered reality of history to our people. And you can also look at it from a standpoint of Reconstruction is never taught in any history book. If you go back to, I went back and looked at my transcripts from my undergrad days, and History 101 was up until 1865. And then 102 was 1877 to the present. Well, there's 12 years that's not taught because it is not taught because they don't want people to know that Black people came out of slavery, were basically kind of just on our own, and then a slave patrol became the police state, was started to try to wrangle us back in. My family has rich history in Georgia and Mississippi. My fourth great grandfather escaped being enslaved in Alabama and fought for the Union Army. So I have a whole lineage of people in my family that left the United States and went to Liberia. So we have a whole lineage of people. Of one of my uncles took his family and said, "The heck with this, we're leaving," and they left and went to Liberia. But throughout it all, they were all sharecroppers. Now my family owns none of the land that they sharecropped on. They own anything. They don't own anything in Mississippi. They don't own anything in Alabama. And the I would say the slave owning family just found out and reached out to our side of our lineage to kind of reconcile with us in regards to what happened. The problem is that these people are millionaires. And it's like, okay, so you have a whole lineage of people who struggled. You all profited off of this after profited because they still had the plantation and they were giving tours out in Alabama. So my family decided to sue them. They say, you all are gonna stop profiting off of this. You're not gonna keep profiting off of this. So when you talk about nativism, we're talking about our ancestors built this country. And it's disrespectful to our ancestors to whitewash the history of them and try to create a altered reality to what happened in America, because if history is not taught, it's forgotten, and the further away we get from slavery, the more and more the history is changed to create a different alternative. That's why you see people saying, you got Mitch McConnell saying, well, nobody here right now owns any slaves. Well, John McCain's family owned slaves in North Carolina. My wife's family, they just found out the United States owns the plantation that her family was enslaved on, the Drayton Hall plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. So the United States government owns it. It's a national preservation site, which means that they are pumping money into it to preserve it, and they're giving tours on it. So how is the United States still profiting off of this plantation? And her family cannot get any of the benefits of that. So as people come into the country, they're getting whitewashed right along with everybody else. They're getting taught this altered reality, and we're supposed to just forget about everything, move on, because nobody here was a slave. You all can go get educated at any college in the United States if you want to. You can go do all these things. We got all these programs for you for you to better yourselves and stop. Just get over it. But the one thing is that we can't get over it because we already were in a race where there was a head start given. And I don't care how fast you are. You could be Usain Bolt. If I give you a 20-yard lead, you're not catching me, no matter how fast you are. Because at the end of the day, I still have a lead. And all we want to do is close that lead to make it true equality and equity for our people. So I think once we start doing that, it starts to ruffle the status quo, and people get pissed off because they don't want that to happen.
So another, oh,
I was saying, if I could piggyback off of that before we go to Chad, I think also when people throw out claims of nativism and xenophobia, they're misunderstanding the war that we are waging. ADOS is not only engaging in class warfare, we are engaging in caste warfare. And you have to look at
what is that? You need to define what caste warfare is.
Caste warfare, in the same way that poor and working class people struggle against the system, because we've been made a bottom caste in this country. We fight against the caste system that is slavery and its reimaginings, via Reconstruction, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, gentrification, etc. And when you see people like Yvette Carnell, Antonio Moore, and other ADOS people excoriate certain people who have origins outside of the United States, you have to look at who exactly are we excoriating? Because when you see Yvette Carnell maybe take to task someone like Roxane Gay, who comes, who is of Haitian descent, yet who comes here, has parents that are well-to-do, pay her rent while she's in college. She goes to Johns Hopkins University. Excoriate Roxane Gay for her vapid comments on Black life and Black poverty in the United States. Yet in the same breath, Yvette Carnell will also excoriate the Clinton administration for their horrid treatment of our Haitian brothers and sisters when they were refugees locked in Guantanamo Bay, and then turn around and feign ignorance and feign some sort of outrage at how Donald Trump treats people at the border. So we excoriate the elites such as Roxane Gay, yet when it's time to advocate for our Haitian brothers and sisters who were oppressed under the Clintons, we show up. We excoriate the Emmanuel Achos of the world. Oprah grabs him and says, let's have this conversation about Blackness, has no idea what Blackness means in this country, shouldn't be allowed to talk. Shut him up and shut him down. But yet, in the same breath, we lift up the descendants of slaves in Nigeria and find common cause with them. We say, we kind of went through the same things. So it's not an excoriation of groups, it's an excoriation of those in the upper class position or upper caste position who get to come to the United States and feign like we're all Black the same, yet those structures of inequality and caste exist, in places like Nigeria, or even when we talked about Lovey, grew up having maids, and I quote from Yvette Carnell, "I don't want Lovey, I want Lovey's maid." So it's not a question of your lineage or where you're from. We're also talking about the caste system and how the United States is playing the shell game with populations and saying, let me bring the elites over here because I know they're not going to cause trouble. These are super capitalists. Let me play a little bit with the Mexicans because they're just going to, take the money and go back home where it spends very well. And so we're pushing back against that system, and also those who are complicit in that system. And also let me say that we excoriate our own, as far as ADOS, much harsher criticisms than those who immigrate here. I mean, for heaven's sake, we are the CBC's worst nightmare, and that's mostly ADOS people.
Oh, we're going to get to CBC momentarily. I want to just address some of these things, which leads to the next criticism, is that ADOS plays oppression Olympics, saying that ADOS oppression is the worst, thus fill in the blank.
So I think that
and I'm sorry, and that's also tied to this thing of, Black people in America weren't the only people who were enslaved. There was slavery in the Caribbean. There was colonization in Africa.
It's not as if we are saying there was no slavery anywhere else in the world. We are saying that, of course, the Haitians have a unique justice claim with the French government. CARICOM, and they have a unique justice claim against the UK, against the British Crown. Here in America, ADOS built this country, and we have a unique justice claim against this government. And we're supportive of, all throughout the diaspora, of those peoples pursuing their own individual or collective justice claims for where they are, right? I think it's extremely offensive for folks to immigrate to a country on the backs of ADOS effort and struggle, right? Because there would be no immigration here if it wasn't for or Black immigration if it wasn't for the Immigration Act of 1965, right? And even if we talk about going back to xenophobia,
Black or brown immigration, there were white people coming into America,
correct,
until 1965.
Correct. And going back to kind of what Mark said, in that we've always been welcoming. And not only have we always been welcoming to other communities throughout the diaspora, but we've actually extended ourselves to try to engage in fights for equality and fights for justice in other areas. Like 30 years prior to the Immigration Act, you had a Mussolini that was waging war on Ethiopia. We were lining up by droves to try to go and fight in that war for Ethiopian justice and equality against fascism. So it's so ahistorical to say, number one, that we're xenophobic and it's not based in anything. And the offensive part to me is that they act as if ADOS can't have independent thought, as if we cannot think for ourselves, view data, and understand what is in our best interest. Because by the data, immigration negatively impacts our communities and our opportunities, by the data. And so what we're being asked to do is ignore that and then say, well, we all just the same, everybody come here and let's all just get along, right? And that has proven to negatively impact us, right? So we're not anti anybody, we're pro ADOS. We're pro our lineage and making sure that we're advocating in our interests. And so I just think it makes, like, I know why Mark laughed, because every time I hear it, I'm like, here goes this joke again. Like it makes no sense and it has no basis in history or data.
I saw something the other day where I forgot which actress said it, and I'm gonna have to kind of find it. But the whole gist was, before she came to the United States, she didn't have to be Black. She was just tribal. And I think that is the context to which we look at. People, we have had love, and we kind of, like I said, we're very welcoming, we're very supportive. in this justice claim against the country, against the United States, we are not. We have never said anything about CARICOM and what they're trying to do for the Caribbean nations. We have always tried to fight. And I saw that, that Barbados decided to do a resolution to leave the crown, leave the European, leave the leave have the take the Queen of England away and get away from the British monarchy. I love that. I was like, yes, finally they have decided to leave colonialism. Good for Barbados. Yeah, I've always advocated that the Haitian government should have long before got rid of the French, because it makes no sense that they are paying money to the French government for fighting a revolution to liberate themselves. And I think when Nelson Mandela was fighting the apartheid that was happening in South Africa, it was ADOS folks from the United States that went there to fight on the ground to help try to dismantle that whole entire system. So for me, I think it is very, very disingenuous to sit up and say that we are some type of xenophobes and we don't like our Caribbean brothers and sisters and African brothers and sisters, because we have always fought tooth and nail for their liberation and for them to be better off than they are. Because if you look at Africa, from the 54 countries, they are allowing European colonialism to jade and create caste systems inside their own communities, and they're allowing Chinese immigrants to come into those countries and to take on and become these massive wealth generators. And I saw something for the Ghanaian president the other day where he said that he was creating these passports, and it was based on whether or not your lineage tied you back to Ghana. And so for the Ghanaian government to say, hey, we're going to stop allowing people, if you're not Ghanaian on both sides of your lineage, a Ghanaian mother, a Ghanaian father, if you don't have that lineage, you can't own land in Ghana. I thought it was brilliant. I said yes, because finally they're taking back their country. So when they do that, we applaud them. We say yes, go do what you got to do to make sure that your tribe is economically empowered. All we're saying is that's what we're trying to do here in the United States. So don't come here and try to say that we're not welcoming and we don't care about you. What we're saying is we have a justice claim against the United States government that is historically tied to slavery that happened here in the United States. We're not discounting slavery in the Caribbean. We are very, very versed in the transatlantic slave trade. So we know it. We know historically how it was tied. The problem is that the chattel happened here in the United States. It was brutal, and it happened to our ancestors. So we're trying to fight to rectify and repair the damages that were done under that type of administration. So I mean, every time I hear that xenophobe or we don't like black immigrants narrative, I just laugh, because when I'm out supporting people, I support black businesses. I don't care what you are. I don't care what flag you flying. When I come to support your business, I am very, very supportive of anybody that looks like me. So, and I think every brother and every person in the ADOS movement feels the exact same way. We don't. What we're saying is our fight is against the United States government, and if you want to help us, you could be an ally and help us fight this. Because if we get uplifted collectively, you're going to get uplifted anyway. So don't sit up here and try to battle us. It's not about who's blacker or whatnot. It's about the policies that affected us and how it systemically put us at the bottom in the system.
Yeah, I think the charge of oppression Olympics is very interesting and also hypocritical, when in the marketplace of ideas, all of these other groups are trying to get the gold medal in that same oppression Olympics. Like you'll never hear anyone excoriate our Arab or Muslim brothers and sisters for rehashing the xenophobia and racism that they experienced post 9/11. You'll never hear anyone excoriate the Jews for constantly revisiting the Holocaust. You'll never hear anyone excoriate the Japanese for revisiting the history of Japanese internment. You'll never hear anyone excoriate the indigenous people for playing oppression Olympics, for constantly rehashing the dispossession of land and genocide. So how is it that ADOS does not get to revisit history and advocate accordingly? I think it speaks to a fundamental disrespect, and it speaks to the fact that we live in a caste system where we are forced at the bottom, that everyone else gets to advocate and gets to speak on and push back against their specific oppression, except for you.
So there's two more that I want to tackle, and I want to move on to the solutions. Thank you for allowing me to talk. We've been in a really great conversation. So the next one goes to reparations specifically. And there have been claims that the ADOS movement has been very divisive, especially towards previous reparations movements prior to. What is your response?
Who's taking that one? Because I already know
Well,
who's taking it.
I mean, it's very interesting because again, I go back to the beginning of 2019 where there was a concerted effort to take ADOS off the board in terms of advocacy, and I think a lot of where the calls or the accusations of division come from is because we reject the current iterations of Pan-Africanism. I guarantee you, if you ask any of our detractors in any other reparations advocacy organizations, they will not deny that a specific debt is owed to the descendants of slaves that built this country. No one will dispute that, nor will anyone dispute that monetary compensation should be direct and targeted, to those people. I think the problem that a lot of them have is that you're being divisive because you eschew Pan-Africanism. That's not the debate. The debate is the debt. Who is owed? What are they owed for? Who is the culpable party? Who are to be the recipients? And that, by definition, is exclusionary. You don't make any reparations claim without inclusion and exclusion. That's the same for the Holocaust. That is the same for Japanese internment. Like, not all Asians would get that. Not even all Japanese would get that. Like the Japanese that come here after the world wars don't get to say, give me a check for Japanese internment. It doesn't make sense. And even when we talk about our indigenous brothers and sisters, this recent Supreme Court ruling gave half of Oklahoma to a specific tribe, not all indigenous people. Like the indigenous in Alaska have no claim to that land in Oklahoma. The indigenous in New York and in Massachusetts and Florida, et cetera, can't say, well, I'm indigenous too. I also suffered genocide and dispossession of land. I want a piece of Oklahoma. Nobody does this to any other group except ADOS. And I go back again, it goes to that fundamental disrespect that has been ingrained in the psyche of America, that the descendants of slaves are a bottom caste. And in the same way that the Dred Scott decision says that there are no rights that the white man should respect, America says this. And immigrants say this, that there are no cultural, social, or political boundaries or claims that I should respect when it comes to the descendants of slaves. And that's something that we have to unpack. And if we're going to talk about Pan-Africanism, that is something that specifically our Black immigrant brothers and sisters that are here and their progeny have to unpack.
Oh, okay. Because I'm glad you did that answer. And I was actually talking about specifically Black reparations organizations that have been in existence prior to ADOS, and the critique of ADOS is very divisive in what it is doing, and it actually is. These are the criticisms. It's actually undermining the work that has already been done and being very dismissive of those who have done the work.
See, go ahead. I think, and I know what that gets to, because you know, the whole issue of reparations started with John Conyers introducing HR 40, right? He introduced HR 40 every single time there was a Congress. Every time the new Congress came in, he introduced it. Ever since 1987. I think what happened is that the message changed, right? There was this movement of people who quote unquote were fighting for reparations, but at the time, I think they didn't have the data. They didn't have the data. ADOS brought the data, and we brought a new energy to a fight that was already on the front. And I think a lot of the detractors try to think that we're saying that reparations was not a talking point prior to the ADOS movement. We have never said that. We have never even acknowledged that we are the first people who went after reparations with the government. But at some point, if you know, no other group, there was a time where black people weren't fighting for anything. So the reparations argument kind of just went under the radar, and there was no energy behind it. So if you can't get a bill passed through a Congress in 2 years, to me it's ineffective, because when the new Congress gets introduced, you got to reintroduce that bill over and over again. John Conyers could get no traction from his own Democratic party members. He couldn't even get it out of the Judiciary Committee ever. And still to this day, HR 40 has still never left the Judiciary to come to the House floor. It is fundamentally flawed because of that. So here we come, infuse a new generation of
but I wasn't just talking about the legislative side of what John Conyers did, but the reparations movements that pre-existed. Reparations has been on the table since the end of slavery.
The thing is that it has never gotten the energy because they can never convince their white counterparts to even take it up. And that is the problem. So and we think fundamentally it's because they had no data to support what they were doing. There have been lawsuits filed in the country with on behalf of descendants of slaves before reparations, and they've been all shot down because they didn't have any legal precedents, because they had no data to back up what they were saying. So and you infuse an entire new generation of activists who are taking on that mantle. What should have happened from our detractors, all these other groups that said that we're trying to evade on their parade, is they should have came alongside us, and we could have debated amongst us and say what we thought was fundamentally flawed in the situation, and we can fight together. That is the problem. There are people in these organizations who are after a money grab. Because if you look at the reparations right now, the HR 40 bill, the way it is written in that there are going to be people that are going to be getting paid to be sitting on the commission to study reparations. We don't need that. We don't need black people that look like us getting the money grab off the back of the people who have been enslaved in this country. We don't need that. There's enough data out there to already make the claim already. So there's no need for you to be getting a $200,000 salary to actually go to Washington, D.C. to work on a commission to study anything. That is our problem. So these old guard people, they want to continue on a legacy of Pan-Africanism and inclusionary, and before you know it, we're talking about reparations for African countries. Like so we don't take them serious, because if you were serious, you would shape it in a narrative that it would only be about the descendants of slaves here in the United States, and anybody else who is a byproduct of the Immigration Act of '65, who's had to deal with mass incarceration and and some systemic issues in the black community that because inherently they're black too. Well, that's a black agenda. That's a whole different legislative conversation. This is about the damages from, and we can't even go back to 1619. We have to start it at 1776, where the country became the United States. Because if we start going back before that, we were not a country. We were under the leadership of the British. So the whole narrative that these organizations are pitting against us because we have come with the data they don't want to hear it because they want to continue doing what they're doing, and they haven't been fighting reparations. I think the last time I heard reparations in anything was in 2004 when Cobra had a reparations event in Washington D.C. and I happened to go to it because I was living in D.C. at the time. But after that, it went completely silent. The only thing I saw was Dave Chappelle did a video where he said this is what's gonna happen when black folks get reparations, but nobody was seriously talking about it. Even President Obama would not take up the mantle for reparations. So I don't understand how these organizations can sit up and say that we haven't given deference to them. No, they don't want us to continue to fight because they have their own agenda in line. So now you got the new kids on the block and we getting them popping.
Right, but can you? But what about what you know? What I'm saying, what about this? Is that can you say that like groups such as like Pan-African organizations and those groups that we were talking about that precede what the reparation conversation is now became fringe organizations as a result of the systemic neutralization of a lot of these organizations in the United States?
I think in some ways it speaks to that neutralization, but I think it also speaks to a generational divide, and that we as the younger generation coming up have valid critiques of those who came before. It's not limited to NCOBRA or NARC or December 12th. It's to the CBC. It's to black politicians because post civil rights and with COINTELPRO. And with the assassination of revolutionaries around the African world, those who were left over either got paid or grabbed some of those gains and ran off, and others fell asleep at the wheel. So the ADOS criticism is not just for those groups, it's for black politics in general. ADOS doesn't just represent reparations as the heartbeat. It represents a reawakening and a refocus of aggressive black politics.
And I think we have to make a distinction as well between existence and effectiveness, right? So
that's a good point. No, that's a good point. You guys are making some really good points. I'm glad we're hashing this out.
Because obviously the reparations fight has been, ongoing and in the conversation since Reconstruction, right? We could go back to Callie House, we go back to Queen Moore. It has been something that we have been, pushing from bottom up and trying to get redress for the atrocities of slavery and Jim Crow. But when we look at the past, 50 years or so, we see a lot of people that have been occupying space but have not been pushing the conversation forward. And it goes back to, what Reggie was just talking about in that, post 1968, at COINTELPRO, there was a very concerted effort to suppress black politics. There was a concerted effort to make sure that black politics did not have substantive conversations or make substantive gains. And so I think when we look at this and we look at the organizations that I had no idea about until I got involved with ADOS, right? It was kind of retroactive learning for me. We look at these organizations, and as you heard Mark said, they've been sitting in these spaces, and they've been meeting, I guess, and having these conversations. But then where are the results? Where are the outcomes? How has the needle moved, right? And I don't think it is divisive to critique the effectiveness of advocacy, right? So if we say to if my boss comes to me tomorrow and says, hey, Chad, you've had this project now for 2 years and you haven't made any progress on it. He has every right then to hold me accountable for that, right? Because that has been in my space, something that I've claimed and been responsible for, and I've made no progress. I've made no movement forward in that project. And so with the reparations project, when we look at the past 50 years, there's been no movement until the introduction of ADOS on the scene, the reinvigoration that you heard Mark talk about at the grassroots. And so that's not divisive, if you ask me. What's divisive is then to look at that new energy that's been injected, and then say, no, we don't want to support that. We just want to stand in front and make sure that we are the ones speaking on behalf of, the reparations project, because we've been here, right? And that's untenable to me. I mean, that's something that I understand it, because as Mark said, attached to what we see as far as these local reparations bills and even HR 40 are, payment plans, for lack of a better word right now, for people involved who have been sitting in those spaces, right? So it looks much more like cronyism and corruption than it does like collective uplift. So again, we have to make that distinction between just being in existence and sitting in a space and being effective in that space.
And also, I appreciate that. And I also wanted to say, I'm sorry, Reggie, I see you there in this conversation. One of the things, there was a complete, total dismantling of all of these Black organizations. So many people got burned, so many people left, and those that remained, as I am doing, I'm a reporter. A lot of these people are college professors, lawyers, people that are not the average everyday person in Los Angeles too. So I'm glad you brought up that point. Reggie?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Chad said, there is a rich, long, centuries-long history of a fight for reparations and restorative justice. So I personally don't understand that, the need to, hey, decenter ADOS and center my organization's work, because ADOS is new. But also in the fight for reparations, a lot of these organizations are also new from the 80s forward. We have Cali House. You could fast forward to Malcolm X. You can fast forward to organizations and movements to kind of create a nation within a nation, to kind of figure out what does restorative justice look like. The 40 acres and a mule. So there's a long history. So acknowledging that history does not necessitate me centering ADOS or someone who came from the 80s forward. So I think part of the problem is that there's groups of people who want to singularly own the reparations conversation. And there's way too much history for any one organization to do that. Cali House belongs to ADOS just as much as she belongs to NCOBRA. Malcolm X and the Nation belongs to ADOS just as much as it's an extension of NCOBRA. So it's just kind of disingenuous, because we, over the long history of Black struggle, both of us, we just got here. So, nobody owns the conversation, and we all have the right to be heard.
Which brings me to the last critique, which rolls into the solutions, I promise you, is ADOS, is blowing up the spot in the politics. It's getting all these Black people not voting. Nobody wants to vote for Kamala Harris. People are saying, don't vote. Your response?
Well, let me say that there's nothing for the not voting. And I just want to kind of see if I can kind of dismantle that here, because the whole not voting thing, they try to tie us to the Russians. And what they always point to is the Senate report that talked about the Russians' IRA, Internet Research Agency, which targeted Black people, and they kind of do the receipts there. But they try to put that on ADOS. And I find it very interesting. It's like, how do you tie a Senate report which monitored Russian activity from 2015 to 2017 and tried to put that on ADOS, who came on the scene in 2019? Like, the timeline doesn't add up. And additionally, when you look at who the Russians were actually targeting, their targets were undoubtedly Black Lives Matter was a vector through which they seek to disrupt things. Pan-Africanism was a vector through which they tried to disrupt things. Intersectional feminism was even a vector through which they tried to disrupt things. So to put that on ADOS, it absolutely makes no sense. And I think the path forward is that we just got to get honest, about that, number one. Number two, we've stated clearly that we wish to increase voter turnout. We're voting down ballot. You know, we're leaving the top of the ticket blank. President, vice president, blank. These choices are not our choices, and that's not new. And I fail to understand, and I challenge Black people within the reparations movement and just Black people generally. Where is your spine? You know, Kwame Ture said decades ago, I don't choose I'm not going to play this lesser of two evils game. I don't choose evil. When I look at Donald Trump, I see evil. When I look at Biden, I see evil. When I look at Pence, I see evil. When I look at Harris, I see evil. And I think it's incumbent upon us to hit that reset button. So let me say clearly that ADOS unequivocally, we're unambiguous about it. I want every Black person, ADOS or not, to go to those polls on November 3rd and vote your displeasure in this two-party shell game. We need to hit the reset button and demand justice, not only in terms of reparation, but in terms of a Black agenda. Because neither party has committed to specific policies to redress not only slavery, but also its vestiges, which affect all Black people. So we are saying unequivocally vote. Just because we don't play into the Democrats or the Republicans' game does not mean that we seek voter suppression. We seek voter expression. And you have to look at those who are targeting us. A lot of these people are looking for jobs in the Democratic Party. So you really have to consider the source when they're throwing these accusations out there. I want every ADOS person at the polls on November 3rd. Everybody goes to the poll. Everybody leaves the presidency blank. And in terms of your localities, vote your conscience based on the local politics and the needs in your area.
And I would add, I agree with everything that Brother Reggie just said, but I would add that it's also extremely offensive to us to say that we cannot have a nuanced understanding of politics and voting, right? It's like we have to be herded to the polls to vote Democrat regardless, right? And we can't understand that if there's no agenda at the top of the ticket, that we should then be looking to express that there was no agenda offered to us in exchange for our votes. So I find it to be when folks have a kind of this willful ignorance about what we are saying, because we're not telling anybody not to vote. Like you heard the Brother Reggie said, we want to turn out in droves. We want to have, Obama style numbers at the polls come November. And we want folks to express themselves at that top of the ticket to say, you had nothing for me, so I'm going to hold on to my vote here at the top of the ticket. But like here in California, I've got a Proposition 16 that reinstitutes affirmative action in the state that I am going to vote for. And that is not voter suppression. That is not withholding the vote. That is us saying that we have a nuanced understanding of this political system and this voting process. And we're going to express our power in the way that we can now, because no one's offering us an agenda to actually proactively vote for.
Yep. And to piggyback on brothers, because I share the same sentiment. And I also think that it's disrespectful that one particular party would feel that they have captured our electorate and we cannot have individual thought. And I think throughout this movement, what we have seen is that you have a lot of educated brothers and sisters who understand political policy. And we now have this rising of the tide that is challenging the old way of looking at how politics it is. This is not business as usual no more. Black politicians, and particularly the Congressional Black Caucus, have never really had Black people to challenge them on issues involving the Black community. So when we started to disrupt the status quo, and you start to see that the Democratic Party participates in voter suppression just as much as the Republican Party does it. Their voter suppression is done during the primary season when they're propping up candidates that they want to be in office, and they're not listening to the voters. And then they're sending out. I know here in Columbus we have what they consider the sample ballot, that they racially target Black communities and basically say these are the people that we are endorsing to run for office. And you're in a primary where you got two Democrats going against each other, and the deck is already stacked. And then they don't complain about the districts being gerrymandered because you have packed in a bunch of Black folks that gives them the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and because they are a Black face, they can sit there for 20, 30 years and have a legacy passed down from their families to their children in one congressional seat. That is how you got Representative Clay in St. Louis. And I'm so glad that Cori Bush was able to upset him and get him out of there, because the Clay family has had a monopoly on that congressional seat. No different than what we're dealing with Joyce Beatty being in the seat that her husband Otto Beatty was in before her. So we have to be.
Where is that?
That's District 3 here. That's District 3 here in Ohio. So her husband had the seat. Now she has the seat. But guess what? When she retires, her daughter's going to get the seat. See, so where is the collective empowerment for the Black voter if all we're seeing is the status quo? So it breaks up the monotony and it changes the landscape, because these people don't want to have a nuanced conversation with intelligent Black thought. And I think because of that, they're trying to put out all this propaganda that that to me is nothing more than McCarthyism, and it's basically it's disrespectful to say that we are just a monolith, because we're not. There's just as many Black independents as there is Black Democrats, and it's to me it's very hypocritical to blame everything on one particular party when you will not accept that you have been ineffective in the job that you're doing for Black people, and symbolic gestures, and all the taking a knee, and wearing kente cloths and dashikis. Like we are beyond that, because that does not equate to policy. So when you start to disrupt that, and when we start to challenge these politicians, and we're not challenging them because of their Blackness, we're challenging you on your policies, what you are signing into law. It becomes very, 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 very clear that they don't care about the conditions of Black people, because as long as they can continue to do what they're doing, they can yield power and corporate interests and secure the bag, while we out here $150 liquid. Like no. I want to secure the bag for my family too, and you should not be able to sit in the seat and be there just solely based on your skin color. And I think that's the issue that most of these people have with the ADOS movement.
If you enjoyed part 1, tune in tomorrow for part 2 in our discussion with #ADOS, the organization known as American Descendants of Slaves. You are listening to The Remedy on Arc Republic.